Hi, and welcome to WiST Presents How I Got into Sports Tech. Sydney and I are excited to welcome two awesome women in the AR, VR, XR space, Devin and Sophie. Thank you. For those of you who may be unfamiliar with WiST, Women in Sports Tech is the nonprofit created to drive growth opportunities for women at all stages of their careers throughout the sports tech and innovation landscape. Through our community, we're uniting men and women to create a more successful and equitable industry. Today's webinar, WiST Presents How I Got into Sports Tech, was created to provide a platform for discovery and discussion. So I'll jump right into the bios. Devin Fox, pronouns she, her, or they, them, is an award-winning, forward-thinking sports leader with a focus on emerging sports technology. She believes exceptional leagues, teams, and players lean into new and innovative ways of doing things while acknowledging the history and heritage of their sport. With a fans-first attitude, she leads the digital innovation efforts for the PGA Tour. Fox's passion for equity in the workplace and education led her to establish and chair PRISM, an LGBTQ+ and allies employee resource group at the PGA Tour. She also serves on the board of directors at STEM2 Hub, an organization focused on providing STEM2 education opportunities for marginalized students and teachers in the area. Fox received her undergraduate degree, Bachelor of Science, from the University of Pittsburgh, and her graduate degree, MBA, from Drexel University. In her spare time, Fox enjoys running, officiating roller derby, and volunteering for Jasmine, a local organization focused on creating better outcomes for the LGBTQ+ youth of Jacksonville, Florida. Sophie Yee is a strategic partner manager on the AR partnerships team who successfully launched the AR Commerce Initiative on Instagram and AR ads on Facebook. She is an expert in the field of augmented reality and has worked closely with partners to launch strategic activations that advance Facebook's AR vision. In addition, Sophie most recently launched a partnership with the New York Times. Welcome, Devin and Sophie, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Devin and Sophie. We're really excited to have you alongside our attendees today. And so I can just get right into it with the questions. Can you guys share a little bit about your career paths and sort of how you ended up where you are today, Sophie at Facebook and Devin at the PGA Tour?
Yeah, so I think my history might be a little bit shorter. So when I first graduated, I actually had this opportunity to work at a company that was based in China. At that time, the company it's a software and hardware company that also has video, photo editing, and AR apps amongst their portfolio. And at that time, I started to manage our partnerships, mostly with Apple, Google, Facebook. And through that, I actually was introduced to Spark, which is Facebook's AR platform, back in 2017. I worked a bit with that team early on to launch some of the first partnership effects coming out of the APAC region. And then after spending 2+ years in Singapore and China, there was an opportunity that opened up at Facebook on this specific team. And I was really fortunate to apply and to have been accepted in, and that's really just taken off from my AR career.
So for me, I've been in the workforce for a lot of years. I won't say how many, but I started out in banking and credit cards and insurance, and I spent a few years doing some of that work. And I've always been in technology, whether it's in IT or on the digital side. But I really felt like the work that I was doing in those arenas were a little bit soul-sucking. Having to deal with, Sarbanes-Oxley back when that first came out, and having to deal with, different kinds of regulations, dealing with people's money and assets. It's important to the people, it's important to the customers, but for me, it was just a little bit too much to worry about. And so I really kind of refocused myself and started to think about how can I work in the e-commerce space, and then how can I kind of pivot that into the sports world. And so I spent a few years working in e-commerce and understanding how that space works, particularly subscription models. And then that was kind of like my parlay back into the sports industry, where I was able to take the information that I had learned, both in the IT space from my previous banking and credit card days, and then also my e-commerce and website and digital operations experience, and bring that into the sports space. So I got really lucky. I found a position at NASCAR that I thought was super interesting, and I applied for it. I didn't know anybody there. And to my surprise, I got a call back, and I was lucky enough to have someone take a chance on me that had no experience in sports, but felt like my experience was transferable. So, look for those opportunities when you can. You may not think that you have exactly the right credentials for a job, but you may have very transferable skills. So I think it's important to remember that as you consider your options when you're entering the sports industry.
Totally. I think that's great advice for our participants, because I think oftentimes, especially these days, people think like you need to have all this experience in sports to be qualified, but really almost sometimes like your experience in industries outside of sports is maybe even more valuable, because you're able to sort of bring things that people in the sports world haven't really thought of, like innovations, that other industries have. That's almost the best way, right? A lot of times in sports, some things are, why have we been doing this the same way for X amount of years? And so it's really those other industries.
True.
Awesome. So just like, what does, and I'm sure there's no typical day in your job, each day is different, but what does a day in your job look like for our attendees, just to see some of the different roles in sports?
Sophie, did you want to go?
You can go first, Evan.
Okay. So the innovation team that I lead here at the PGA Tour is quite small. It's actually just two of us. So I spend my time building strategy and roadmaps to determine how we will use our resources and prioritize our work. I also spend a lot of time presenting new ideas and kind of emerging tech outside of the XR arena to our partners throughout the tour as they emerge in the industry. For example, a couple of years ago, I introduced the business to the concept of NFTs and cryptocurrencies. And now we're, working on negotiations with several service providers in the space that will allow us to, put something out into the marketplace. I will say that we don't have our own development team, no developers, which means that for the innovation program specifically, we do have them obviously for our product and operations groups. But for innovation specifically, we don't have a team all to ourselves, which means we have to use third parties for most of the work that we do. So I do spend a fair amount of my day searching for and learning about new startup companies who are working in the space that I'm interested in, whether it's XR or other types of emerging tech. So I hear, pitches a couple of times a week. I work closely with the project teams who are actually managing the day-to-day operations of our experiments and our projects. And because most of our work is kind of outside of the like standard production suite of products that the PGA Tour offers, I do a lot of I spend a lot of time socializing what we're doing so that other people on the team, are aware of what we're doing and can tap in, for example, if, they think, oh, I have a sponsor who might be interested in this or whatever, or maybe I can use this for our on-site fan experience. So I like to do a lot of socialization of what we're doing so that people can tap in as needed.
Yeah, I think for my side, I really map out to the AR product team. So my day-to-day will really depend on the time of year. So every 6 months or so, we work on road mapping and planning out the half. So for the first few months of each half, a lot of it is more internal meetings and alignments with our product teams, really advocating for our partners and what we're hearing across the ecosystem. And that really encompasses brands, including sports as well, and the creator ecosystem. So Spark is an AR platform, and we have over 100, I think over 140,000 creators. So being able to really understand the needs of the creator ecosystem as well. And then once we get through planning, I would say it's probably more external meetings where I will identify a partner that can address a specific use case. So I previously worked on a lot of our AR commerce efforts, but more recently I've been working on world AR, or anything that uses the back-facing camera. So finding partners who either have like specific locations or content that is relevant for our target demographic of users, and then working and really educating them, bringing them up to speed on what AR is, what Spark is, and really figuring out the best creative execution that can either drive a specific business need, or maybe it's a brand marketing opportunity, but working with the partner and understanding what their top priorities are, and figuring out how AR can solve that. Yeah, I think that the day to day, I love that question, because I think one thing that's really fun about being in a partnerships role is the ability to meet all types of partners, that can range from startups who are actually developing these AR experiences to connecting with various sport leagues or sports startups. So it's definitely a fun role.
Awesome. How do you guys see VR, AR, XR engaging fans? And just to push it a step further, how has the BGA Tour or Facebook been able to emerge AR, VR, XR during the pandemic, since everything has been all digital and it's been a bit tricky engaging with fans, or everyone being at home?
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's kind of obvious that XR is becoming more and more common and mainstream. For the last couple of years, we've seen brands and companies really engaging in the creation of what I like to call the pretty stuff. At the tour, we've tried really hard to focus on what I call the hard stuff, so that we can build the pretty stuff later on. And just kind of like define, hard stuff. I mean, integration of our proprietary scoring and data systems, historical data systems called ShotLink. I think it's really important to prove that hard stuff first, prove that we can integrate our data, prove that we can use those platforms with what we have available, and then we can build stuff that is, enjoyable for fans. And so usually our proof of concepts are focused really on that hard stuff. And I think, on the heels of the pandemic, a lot of brands and companies have had a chance now to play with the tech and to figure out a few things. So I think we'll really start to see like more deep integrations with XR. So like, for example, I was just reading an article, a Forbes article yesterday or the day before, that talked about Stella Artois, the beer brand, just recently announcing that they're partnering with, I forgot the name, Zed something, Zed Run or Zed XR or something like that, to give users access to an exclusive set of NFTs that are related to horse racing, but in a virtual space. So like seeing these integrations, are going to be like the next step in how brands are beginning to use this. It may seem like weird, but if you think back to games like Pokemon Go and CryptoKitties, they were doing those experiments many years ago. And so now brands are starting to catch up, and you'll start to see some of that stuff emerging. But I also, just from my own perspective and the work that I've done over the last 5 years, want to point out that, from my perspective, I feel like I really need to be choosy about when I do use XR. I feel like I need to have a reason to use it for the fan experience, particularly in sports. Like doing something in XR for the sake of doing it doesn't really serve my particular demographic and my fan base very well. And it can be at times expensive to do. So it doesn't really serve my company well either if I'm just building a bunch of XR experiences that aren't really meaningful for the fan base. So we're really focused on what the value of the medium can bring to golf fans, sports fans. And we really, like I said before, are always trying to prove the hardest thing first before we can create anything else, using these tech platforms. So I'll pause there and have Sophie jump in.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, COVID has been, this is horrible to say, but almost a blessing for AR. I think a lot of partners and people have started to really look at AR as a solution to help you connect with your consumers or your fans or your followers. And we didn't have this opportunity before. So in general, I think there's just a lot more interest. I think for sports specifically, a lot of the questions or like the asks I think that I've heard is, how do we still allow people to feel connected, right? Feel connected to us as a league, us as a team, us as athletes. And it's been interesting because I think there's this broader topic of like, how can AR, VR, XR connect us in more meaningful and immersive ways? And that's like it's a challenging topic to address. I think we've started by, are there AR effects that you can do where you show you're a Lakers fan, or you show you are, you're watching the Super Bowl as an example. I think that's, from a technical perspective, probably what we can do today. But as we start to think about the next like 3, 4, 5 years, and we have more functionalities coming on the line, like what might that look like? I think one great example is like during the NBA, they had the bubble. And I remember, Microsoft tried to, or had the one screen where a bunch of users could dial in and it felt like you were sitting there. With XR or with VR, you could actually create that feeling of community, if you will. And so I think as our tech gets better, I can definitely see us leaning more into helping people feel like they're still connected, especially because, even though the world is starting to open back up, distance will still always be a challenge that we have to face. And I think AR, VR, XR are really great tools and technologies to help us tackle those challenges.
Yeah, we certainly, as a league, we certainly experienced a lot of that during COVID. I mean,
Right.
not being able to have tournaments at all. But then when we were able to start having tournaments again, having people feel connected to the event that's happening, even though they can't go to see it in person, was a really critical piece of what we were trying to do. And so trying to find ways to use this tech to make them feel like they're a part of the physical space, and that they can actually attend the tournament, even if they're doing it from their living room.
Right.
And I think golf really has like a unique opportunity there, right? Because like I've been to one US Open when I was in 4th grade, 2006. And I even when you go to one hole, if you're a spectator, like you're usually you're at one hole, let's say, maybe not for the entirety of the day, you can move around, of course, but it has a really unique opportunity because even for fans who are there in person, there probably is still some opportunity to engage them with emerging technologies.
You're absolutely right, because when you're watching like a traditional stick and ball sport with a court or a baseball field or whatever, it's a fixed space. And so, you have, this little square or this little rectangle that you're working within. And with golf, you've got, 18 different things happening across, the course of the day with hundreds of players across hundreds of acres. So there's, multiple storylines that need to be told that fans want to know about, and multiple players that they want to be engaged with throughout the experience. And so finding ways to surface all of the things that are happening across, hundreds of acres is actually incredibly difficult. And even when you're watching the broadcast, which does a decent enough job of covering the event, you're still only getting about, 15% of the shots that players are actually making on the course. So we've got kind of a wealth of additional material that we want to surface, but we just need to find the right ways to do that.
Totally. Yeah. It's like I was watching on Sunday, and even before Rory sort of blew up, like even before, when he was still really in the hunt, I was like, well, why aren't they showing Rory? And it's just like, well, there's only so many people that they can show, right? So especially when those people are teeing off around the same time. And so I think there's like with golf, a ton of opportunities, and it's a really exciting space. And especially because, with XR, which for our audience, if they're not as familiar with the term, it's sort of like an all-encompassing term that includes AR, VR, and other sort of mixed reality integrations. For golf, one of the main challenges, I think, in some other sports is that like stoppages in play, for example, it's hard to have these activations when you have a game like basketball that really the only stoppages is a timeout or maybe sometimes, a replay review. With golf, it's a sport that really has awesome opportunities, similar to sometimes tennis, right? With, these activations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So just as a next question, and this is actually also a question that we got from an audience member, Amir, who's a huge WiST supporter. What are some great AR activations you've seen in sports today? And where do you think it's going? And, so this was one of the questions. We'll take more of the audience questions later on. So if you have, submit through the Q&A, but sort of what is either your favorite project that you've worked on with an activation, or one of the favorite ones you've seen outside of your sport?
So I've got two favorites, one older one that's not available anymore and one current one that's about to be launched. So in the past, this was several years ago, we worked with a third party and one of our partners, MasterCard, to create the very first AR kit experience that integrated live scoring data into an AR kit app. And so in this experience, users and fans would be able to take like a 3D model of an entire hole from a golf course and place it tabletop, and then be able to watch that during a live tournament as players are making their shots through the hole. Users would actually see live shot trails being drawn onto the hole model in real time. And it sounds pretty standard now, but at that time, no one had integrated live sports data into an experience like that. And so, from my perspective, I'm super proud of that, having, been able to work on something so, leading edge at that point. And for me, having Eddie Q talk about my app on stage during WWDC was super cool that year. So that's kind of one of my personal favorites. And then one that we're working on currently right now is a new product concept for the upcoming 2021 FedEx Cup playoffs that will be later here this summer. We'll be using various types of technologies, including like XR and LiDAR and other things, to demonstrate long range display of XR overlays on fan devices or user devices. Long range because our courses obviously and our holes can be very large and cover a lot of space, sometimes acres, hundreds of acres at a time. And those overlays are really being built to enable an at venue predictive gaming golf experience and scenarios that are really enhanced by the physical space that you're in at the actual golf course. It's got ShotLink data integrated like we talked about before, and other types of content like video, but also having this ability to not just see an XR experience at the golf course, but include predictive gaming options so that you're not totally bored in between shots as people come up to the tee and take shots. So for us, that's really interesting. We're working with a company called Quintar on this, and I'm super looking forward to seeing how, obviously this is just a predictive gaming experience first, just to test it out and see how we do with it. But I'm thinking about how it can be adapted into the worlds of sports betting and sports gambling, and how do we intertwine those two things with XR experiences kind of once this is all done. So that's what I'm thinking about next. And I think, and I predict that you'll start to see experiences like that in the sports industry start to emerge in the next year or so.
I think the live data component is such an exciting piece for AR specifically. I think I have two favorites. One was so as I mentioned, I focus on world AR, so anything relating to the back facing camera. And one thing that we did was, I think oftentimes AR can be labeled as gimmicky or promotional. And historically, I feel like when I work with partners, they usually come to me with some idea that they already have. And we actually did some exploration work with 3 partners where we sat down and we understood what are your priorities, right? Is there a new game that's coming? Is the season launch happening? Are the finals? And so really understanding what is the intention and the purpose for the AR activation, and then being able to build something that can actually achieve those goals. And so being much more intentional about it and not just, slapping logos on or putting 3D assets in, just being mindful of like, what is the value add from an AR perspective? And I think, Devin, you said this earlier, but don't do XR for the sake of doing it. I think that is such an important thing to really go by. So I think that exploration work, and we ended up launching 3 AR ads with that. And we did see that the AR experience contributed to the overall ad campaign. The second one, I think, is a lot of with all emerging tech, I think part of our role is to really push the boundaries, push what's had never been done before or something that people haven't seen, or being able to get that out to more audiences. And, one idea, I think maybe the Dallas Mavs did this, but when you're in the stadium, if you were overlaying, the AR content was overlaid on top of the court. So you're able to get stats from all of the players, previous games, highlight clips. I think, when I'm at a basketball game, those are pieces of information that would be great to have, right? Imagine you're standing there, I'm able to compare different athletes, different players from different teams. So being able to use AR to help with the delivery of information is definitely an area that I'm excited to explore more.
Yeah, thank you for those insights. Devin, can you speak about your role as the chair of PRISM at the PGA and the impact the group has had?
Yeah, so I wasn't planning on talking about PRISM today, but I'm happy to talk about that. So I'm super proud, I'm probably most proud of the work that we've done in PRISM over the last couple of years. We did not have an LGBTQ or allies group at the tour before this, and we did have a bunch of other groups. And so I felt like it was really necessary to bring this group to the organization. And the reason I did it was, I actually maybe 4 years ago, my brother came out to me as trans, and he was living kind of a double life in law enforcement, and going home and living as a trans man, a straight trans man, with a wife and 3 kids, and then when you go to work, you're living as a lesbian woman with 3 kids and a wife, is very trying and very draining. And so when I kind of understood the experience that he was having, I felt like, well, what impact can I make? I'm not part of the law enforcement industry. Like I don't work in law enforcement. I don't have any real connections other than him. And so I'm like, well, what is my sphere of influence? Well, I work in sports. And so that's where I can make an impact. And so I started this group, not just to support my brother in general and other trans people, but to support myself. I'm also, I consider myself to be part of the LGBTQ community. And so I never personally felt like I needed allies because I experienced a fair amount of privilege as, a straight passing person. And so, I realized that all of the work I had done for my brother over the years was something that needed to be brought into my work life as well. And so we've not only established the group, we've grown it to about 100 members in the last couple of years, which is pretty incredible considering how small the PGA Tour is. We don't have that many employees. And so, just the support that we've been able to gain internally, some of the content we've been able to create that will share and educate new allies at the PGA Tour who maybe weren't considering themselves something like that in the past. We've been able to achieve what I consider to be kind of our landmark achievement over the last year and a half, which is updating our benefits to include same and different sex domestic partners as well as spouses. We only covered spouses previously. And we've also been able to add gender affirming care for transgender employees or transgender employee dependents. So things like, gender affirming or confirming surgeries, any of those, special, hormone or medical treatments that are associated with stuff like that. So just being able to see certain employees come to me and say like, hey, my son or my daughter wants to use this benefit. Can you tell me more about it? And hey, I can't believe you were able to get this added. This means that, my daughter can get this surgery before she goes to college. And so even just having one or two or three people tell me that, either they or their family members were, positively impacted by that really just makes it all worth it for me.
That's awesome. And yeah, I mean, that's a huge step. I think that like, even if it was one person, right, that could change someone's life. And I've read recently, I read that like Starbucks has had one of the, I think their healthcare policy for the past like 10 or 5 years, maybe a little longer, has included like gender surgery and other like reconstruction, and been really, so that's the fact that a company healthcare policy could really change someone's life. And even if it seems like just one thing that you do, it's a huge role. So amazing work, and continue to, yeah, Sydney's silently snapping. So now, before we go to audience submitted questions, we're just going to do a quick 1-minute speed round with both of you. What are your favorite books?
Go ahead, Sophie.
I got really deep into Talking to Strangers by Malcolm Gladwell. Also, I loved Untamed. That was like probably one of my COVID highlight books. Devin, over to you.
I'm not sure if graphic novels and comic books count, but my favorite is the Sandman series of graphic novels by Neil Gaiman. That was one of those things where I read it when I was a kid, I read it when I was a teen, I read it when I was in college, I reread it when I was an adult, and I reread it, every couple of years, and like just consistently is good for me. And so it's one of those things that I can just read over and over again. But if comics don't count, I would say I would fall back on either A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess, which is pretty old, or Siddhartha by Herman Hesse.
Awesome. And I love Talking to Strangers. I'm a big Malcolm Gladwell fan, so I actually feels like forever ago, but I think in September, like 2019, when he went on the book tour, I saw him and then I got the book. So it was quite exciting for my Malcolm Gladwell fandom. And then what are your favorite podcasts, if you guys are podcast listeners?
I actually don't listen to podcasts. I might be the only person on earth that hasn't joined the audio only revolution. So I have, unfortunately, no podcast to offer. However, I will take the opportunity to give a shout out to my partner, who is a podcast creator, and he's done a lot of work in the motorcycle racing industry to create content for them. So he's got a couple different podcasts. One is called Off the Groove with Scotty Dubler, and it just kind of like interviews people in the industry. And then he's got another one, I forget what it's called, but I think maybe it's called Car on Two Wheels, where it talks with one of the chief competition officers who used to work with AFT, which is the Flat Track Motorcycle Racing League. So check those out if you have some time.
I am very interested. I'm definitely going to take a look. I'm not a huge podcast listener either, but 99% Invisible, I think, is just fascinating. Like, I love to learn. So it focuses on like design and architecture. And I love to I feel like my brain likes to just like try and understand everything from every angle. And the podcast is really interesting because it focuses on stuff that we normally overlook on our day-to-day. So it's definitely fun to hear about things that we're not really paying attention to.
Awesome. Thank you for those recommendations. And we'll definitely share those with everyone after the webinar. And then now we'll head over, we have about 10 minutes, so we'll head over to the audience submitted questions. So someone asked, what technical or soft skills do you think are crucial when working on AR/VR projects in sports?
If you don't mind, I'll jump in for this one. I think, because a lot of the work that we do these days in really almost any industry, but especially in sports tech, is so project oriented. I a number of years ago, I went and got my PMP, which is a project management professional certification issued by the Project Management Institute. And I realized that that is not a technical like tool or a technical certification, but I think, you know, being able to apply project management principles to almost any work that I do is really critical to my success and to the success of my department and my company. So that's one thing that I would recommend if you're interested in kind of growing your soft skills.
I think for me, it's, and this will sound crazy, but it's an understanding of the platforms and the technology and what's actually feasible. I think oftentimes I come across people in the industry and, you know, they might see something like plane tracking. And even if you don't know the technical implementation, I think an understanding of the capabilities and functionalities is really important. That'll help when you're talking to your partners, you know, whether or not it's like internally or externally. And then I think in terms of being able to kind of troubleshoot too, you're able to identify what might be broken. So for me, that's always something that I try to stay on top of, even though I know there's a lot that's changing. But read as much as you can. I think that's like a really good thing for this AR VR XR space.
Can
Yeah,
I?
Sorry, no, you go. There you go, Devin.
I was going to throw in a couple of other things that were related to like if you're interested in getting into emerging tech in sports. So like there are organizations out there like the VR AR Association. It's a paid member organization. You may be able to have your employer like subsidize the cost for you or something, but there are groups like that that you can join. And conferences like AWE, Augmented World Expo, or even like mainstream stuff like the South by Southwest. The sports track in South by Southwest has a ton of XR related sports panels. Like I've done at least one XR panel for the last like 3 or 4 years specifically at South by. So like don't overlook, you know, big conferences like that. And then I know, Sophie, I'm gonna like shout out this for you. Like play with the tools that are available to you,
Right.
like Spark, that allow you to create your own experiences. And if you find that you're creating cool stuff, you know, share it with your manager, share it with your company, and like showcase what you're doing to say, hey, like, do you think this is a tech that we might be able to start using? Or how can I experiment more with this? Can I get some time, 10% of my week to build stuff like this? So use those tools that are out there, particularly any of the free ones, and put them in front of your employer.
And I think that even, you know, like if you use those tools and you might not be the person who ends up implementing, right, the final thing, because there will be someone who, you know, is more proficient in Unity or whatever it is in terms of the language. But just by working with it, you, as Sophie was sort of alluding to, like you understand the technical components, right? So just by playing around with one of those tools for a few hours a week, instead of, you know, I think sometimes like, I think that reading is so important. I was going to say, like, just to what Devin said, you know, I read Hacker News even, which is like it's like just random technical articles of the day, but I have it as one of my things that I like click every single day to just see, because, you know, seeing some of the trending technologies, even if it's not specifically in your industry, I think always gives you new ideas. But I think also, like, you know, spending time looking at the tools, especially if you're looking to break into a space, gets you sometimes a little bit beyond the buzzwords, right? A lot of times, like certain articles, not all of them will be buzzwordy, and being able to break through that and understand some of the building blocks, I think is really crucial. And for our audience members looking to get into, you know, AR, VR, other emerging technologies, I think that's huge. So to wrap it up, we have one more audience submitted question we'll take. How do you see XR being incorporated into sports performance technologies where it can help athletes in their performance or healing from their injuries?
We're actually doing a little bit of that now, not with XR. We have a partnership with Whoop for the Whoop bands, and a lot of our athletes are wearing them on the tour. And one of the things we discovered through Whoop and the data that they're collecting on the players is like early warning signs and early indicators for COVID, actually. So, an increased rate of respiration was an early indicator of a case of COVID. And so, like, I think that's super important, not just to diagnose issues like that, but to help in recovery, understanding how your body is reacting to the things that you're doing while you're playing the sport you're playing, and being able to give you informed, steps for how you can best recover your body is one thing. But I think to your point about XR, there may be opportunities to include visualizations, XR visualizations in those recommendations in the future, which will be much more meaningful, because I think if you read a sentence that says, do this, you're like, okay, I'll go do that. But if you have an XR type of experience that can show you how to do this and make sure that you're doing it correctly and give you feedback in real time if you're not doing it correctly, is super useful.
Yeah, I agree. I think there, with the inclusion of AI, I think these experiences will only get better, right? It could either be to teach you how to stretch out, or, stretch to fix an injury that you have, or maybe it's using AI and XR to help you improve a skill set or improve something, so you're less likely to get injured. But I think once we have wearables on the line, these types of experiences will really be something that we can power.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. So we know that many of you, our panelists and participants that joined us today, have a lot of Zoom fatigue, and we are near of what hopefully is the tail end of the pandemic. So we want to say thank you so much for joining us on today's WiST Presents How I Got into Sports Tech webinar. In the meantime, please check out our new career hub, www.wistnetwork.org, and connect with us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram for more updates, webinars, and amazing insights from our guest speakers like Devin and Sophie, who are here to change the ratio. We'll also put on the podcast and book recommendations on our story next week as a recap in case you missed it. But yes, thank you so much. Can we pause for a photo really quick, if that's okay? Awesome.
This feels like very beginning of the pandemic, but it's nice. And thank you again so much, Devin and Sophie, for your time and for all of your insights today. It was awesome having you on.
Yeah, our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I would love to add, though, for people who are attending events like this and wanting to get into the sports industry, keep connecting with events like this and with organizations like WiST. And when you do attend something like this, like I can't speak for Sophie, but my inbox is open on LinkedIn. So if you want to connect or you want to talk or have additional conversations about this topic, feel free to reach out to me. I will happily accept your invite and have any conversation you'd like to have. So thank you.
Thank you so much for being an amazing guest. And yeah, these opportunities are definitely how you sort of network and meet people. So continue to learn from others and network. Thank you all and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Happy Friday.